Okay, we're good. All right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and technical gremlins. Welcome to this ISIS International Affairs Forum. I was just thinking to myself, what could go wrong? And there we go. And on top of that, my neighbor upstairs is doing renovations to his unit, so there's someone drilling from time to time. But in spite of all that, the Australia-Malaysia bilateral relations look in much better shape, I would have to say. And that is what we are here to discuss today morning. We're here for a webinar on Australia-Malaysia bilateral relationship and the elevation of that relationship. It's been a long relationship, one that predates Malaysian history. We have been strategic partners for many years, and this has recently been elevated to a comprehensive strategic partnership. And beyond the optics, beyond the rhetoric, today we want to look at the tangible opportunities, the shared opportunities, but also the shared challenges. And the CSP highlights a couple of thematic areas of cooperation: economic prosperity, society and technology, defense and regional security. And today we'd like to look at how think tanks, academic institutions, CSOs, and non-government stakeholders can take advantage of the low-hanging fruits to deepen the scope and depth of the bilateral and multilateral cooperation. And before we go into opening remarks, I would be remiss for me to not acknowledge and thank the Australian High Commission for their support and their partnership in organizing today's webinar. So to get things started, we will go for opening remarks, and Your Excellency, Andrew, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And can you hear me clearly now? Excellent. Okay, I'll proceed. Well, look, as you can see, I'm not wearing a suit and tie like so many other people in Malaysia. I'm working from home today. For those in Australia, Malaysia has done well in managing the pandemic, but we are still booking in about 2,000 new cases each day at the moment. And so like many workplaces, we're distancing working shifts and trying to minimize contact to keep our teams safe, which we've by and large managed to do. So look, this is a great opportunity. I thank you very much to ISIS for organizing this seminar. As you said yourself just a minute ago, the relationship is very old and very deep, and largely flies under the radar, I think. I really struggle to think of many countries in the world with whom we have a deeper or more comprehensive relationship than with Malaysia, but it doesn't always get the attention that it deserves. And the challenge from the point of view of our team and the Australian High Commission is, how do you refresh and keep relevant a relationship that already is so mature and so well understood by both sides? And so I was very happy when we were able to conclude the CSP. I'll let you in on a secret. When I first proposed this idea more than 2 years ago, the initial reaction from some quarters was, really? Why do we need that? Things are going fine. But having formalized this just this year between the two prime ministers, nobody would say that today. I think we're entering an era where these relationships will become more important, and their care and maintenance and their updating will become more important. Some people have suggested to me that Malaysian foreign policy is largely static. I don't buy that. I think it's true that concepts like non-alignment, ASEAN centrality, being friends with everybody are deeply embedded in Malaysia's foreign policy DNA. But Malaysian foreign policy traditionally has also been very pragmatic. And I think Malaysia has been very good at creating coalitions around issues where it's needed to. In the trade area, for example, Malaysia doesn't stand necessarily with its ASEAN partners and has been a key ally of Australia in the Cairns Group. In strategic and defense issues, during the first and second emergency, and even more during confrontasi, Malaysia created pragmatic coalitions in pursuance of its own interests. And I think that's what Malaysia generally is good at doing. And for me, that's the quintessential sign of a middle power. That's how middle power diplomacy works. You build coalitions, you engage in multilateral diplomacy, minilateral, and you operate according to your interests in coordination with others and using the structures and the mechanisms available to you. And increasingly, I think Malaysia is thinking and acting like a middle power, which is what Australia has always described itself as. So I think there are great opportunities going forward. It's an era of increasing challenge, as everybody here knows. And I think it'll be very interesting to hear how the panelists believe that Australia and Malaysia can work more closely to make our relationship even more mutually beneficial and relevant than it has been already in years past. So again, thank you very much for focusing on this important issue. Thank you for the opportunity and for being patient as I navigated our technical problems.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Your Excellency. And with that, Mr. Herizal, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Thomas. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Andrew, His Excellency Andrew, for taking time to be part of this important webinar. I would also like to thank all the speakers, for agreeing to be part of this. I think this is great. Much have been said by Andrew earlier. I think those are all very important and strong points. I'd just like to add that, I totally agree with everything that he said. Malaysia and Australia has this special relationship, among others, the people-to-people relationship that we often take for granted, I think. Australia still hosts possibly the largest Malaysian batch of students every year. And that means a lot, for Malaysia's future development. I think we have had amazing students coming back, sharing their experiences in Australia, as well as build, sectors of the economy and foreign services as well. Now, one thing is very clear, and I totally agree that this relationship might have not always put to its place. Not very much has been discussed about Malaysia-Australia relationship in the public forum in Malaysia, and I think more needs to be done. I think Australia is a natural partner to Malaysia. Definitely, a country that Malaysia looked as a partner to create a prosperous, peaceful, and definitely just Asia-Pacific region. And I think all the speakers today will probably dive into all of these areas of the comprehensive strategic partnership to actually discuss some of the challenges and opportunities to achieve that. Again, on behalf of ISIS, I thank everyone. I think this is very important, and we look at this as one of the key initiatives that we can have at ISIS, partnering with our Australian friends to see the areas where we can mutually benefit each other and bring this relationship even closer. With that, I invite everyone again to stay at this webinar and pose your questions and do contribute whenever you can. Thank you, Thomas. Back to you.
Thank you so much, CE. Okay, let's get into the meat of it. So we have three speakers with us today morning, and they are going to go in order. They will each be speaking for about 10 minutes, and then we will open it up to a discussion and a Q&A. And first up is Dr. Amrita Markey. Amrita is a visiting fellow in the Department of Political and Social Change at ANU. She's a historian with a primary interest in the identity politics of colonial Malaya and contemporary Malaysia. Amrita sits on the advisory board of the ANU Malaysia Institute. And Amrita is going to share her thoughts on the bilateral aspect of this relationship for about 10 minutes. Amrita, take it away.
All right, well, I will take it away. So thank you to start with to Thomas, Herizal and Andrew for inviting me. That's, it's great to have a chance to participate. Now, I've been, of course, asked to talk about the bilateral relationship with a kind of an Australia and Malaysia coverage, especially as somebody who works between research institutions and a civil society organization. I have a kind of two sides to my professional life, and that's how I run it. So, I guess I've got to talk about everything in this talk, which is fine. So I've been working on Malaysia and Australia's outlook on it and the rest of the region since I was an honours student in 2003. And that's quite a long time. So I've seen what Andrew actually just described of a relationship that was always just assumed to be going along swimmingly and didn't really need a lot of attention to kind of recent times where there's been a bit more to think about and a few more challenges. So let me start by saying that I think the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership is an important development in terms of Malaysia expanding its range of options in an increasingly contested region. It's also important in terms of Australia doing more to build a proper platform on which to offer key neighbours like Malaysia a better range of options, not only for hedging and balancing in its foreign policy, but for managing key internal political and human security challenges that we might as well be upfront about. So I'm just going to put them on the table and then I'm going to move on. Look, in short, Malaysia is under federal emergency rule. It has suspended parliament and basically all political rights for citizens. The pandemic continues to rage despite this fact, despite being the rationale for the emergency. Now, the next election is due in 2023. In theory, the emergency will be lifted in August, but there are no clear signs on the horizon about how that emergency is going to be lifted and how the election is going to take place, or in fact, how the pandemic is going to be ended. Now, Malaysia very much wishes to be seen as a democracy, and Australia, along with its Indo-Pacific partners, would very much like to be able to continue describing it that way. So the hope on all sides probably is that by August, or at most by 2023, we will all be able to wash our hands of the emergency, put it behind us, call it a blip. That's the language I hear around the place. We would like to be able to call it a blip experienced by one of ASEAN's 4 remaining democracies, and of course, one of our great partners at the heart of the Indo-Pacific. So that's on the table. Let's put it there. Now, if this outcome actually came about, if we were able to look back in 2024 and say, gee, that was a funny blip, wasn't it? That would be a very strong achievement indeed, especially in the context of regional developments and views on those developments as recently set out in both nations. So on our side, we've just had a speech by our Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, at the Raisina Dialogue yesterday, where the world is at risk of a great polarization between autocracies and democracies. And so Australia has to do a better job at pushing for democratic survival in the region. At the same time, we've had a strong public reaction in Malaysia to the Foreign Minister calling his Chinese counterpart a big brother, because Malaysians do continue to want and value non-alignment, even as the environment gets more difficult. And many Malaysians want and value democracy for that matter, which is why the government keeps trying to reassure everyone that democracy will survive this emergency, even though its ultimate direction can't possibly be clear to the government either. So now, I can't assure anyone that a democratic, non-aligned Malaysia that is friends with both sides of this so-called polarization and yet captive of neither is actually going to be achieved. After all, as Thomas mentioned, I'm a historian. I keep thinking of the 1870s, which is when, the Malay states began to be taken over by Britain after decades of balancing between Siam, Britain, Germany, the Bugis, the Netherlands, and so on. And I am aware that Malaysia is nervous of some of Australia's friends, as well as, some of its purported enemies, which seem to be closing in on the Malacca Strait from every direction. So if Malaysia is feeling squeezed by purported friends and alleged enemies, then I'm not surprised at all. It is a complicated situation. Still, I commend both governments for signing the CSP. I think it's an important, as I mentioned before, option, and everybody needs options. And I'm glad that Australia seems to be stepping up to give its desired outcome in 2024 and the narrative that it would like to be able to put on it a better chance of actually coming true. Now, I'll be honest, I already have been. I don't think we've been doing enough. For a long time, we've had a narrow focus on too few issues. And for that reason, I'd like to see both nations use the CSP as the basis for a more comprehensive and mutually engaged research and policy development effort around a wider range of issues that are actually important to us both. We both have got to deal with a changing region, and Malaysia's right in the middle of it. I suppose we are too, but Malaysia even more so. And I think the text of the CSP lays out a reasonable basis for more of this kind of engagement to actually happen. After all, it says that our mutual priorities are economic prosperity, society and technology, and defense and regional security. It talks about the exchange of students and academics, which is good, quality assurance and research cooperation. It talks about prosperity, but it also talks about being open and inclusive. And it also says that we are both multicultural and multi-faith parliamentary democracies. So on this basis, I'd like to see scaled up research cooperation on these issues. And I don't mean one-off initiatives that last for 2 years, that are buried at the bottom of some university structure, but actually something operating at a scale that is actually sustainable. So with a coordinating body running it, a proper bicultural leadership that knows where to push ahead on issues that matter, where you can make a difference, while also avoiding all the landmines. So I'd like to see something that isn't too timid. I'd like to see a step up in terms of, research and policy advice and discussion is actually a tradable service, as well as an effort, for everybody to be able to address their challenges. But it can't be too timid. It's going to have to be able to push for change. Both societies need an element of change, and yet it can't be rushing in, advocating wholesale, non-choreographed social transformation or democratic transition, which, by the way, are two themes that I've seen rise and fall in my time helping develop bilateral research partnerships over the last decade. Rather, we need to be able to bring Australia's own challenges into the same frame as Malaysia's. Not bring a troop of 10 white men to tell Malaysia how to reform. Now, I may be Australian, but I was born in Malaysia and I know how it feels. I can tell you that I feel the same way when I witness that sort of performance. But rather, we can actually bring the two nations into the same frame. We say, after all, that we share a lot of similarities and a long history. So basically, I'd like to recommend a research and policy consortium, bringing together a selection of Australian and Malaysian research institutions, think tanks, businesses, and civil society organisations, not in competition with each other, but as a kind of a Team Australia effort and a Team Australia-Malaysia effort, which would be nice as well, to steer, conduct, and amplify research on topics that can be nested under the themes of the CSP. Now, there are others on this panel who can talk about the traditional security topics that could be included, and we'd also need to consider science and technology, of course, but let me just list out some key human security topics that I think we could bring together in the same frame as part of an initiative like this. 1, inclusive economies that both generate growth and distribute benefits equitably. 2, social cohesion. I've been a part of a little prototype study of this nature, but ultimately, we say we're both multicultural, multi-faith nations. How do we manage ourselves? How do we best move forward in terms of demands for equity and diversity that are, perfectly rational and reasonable, and yet at the same time, very often a need to restructure opportunity so that everybody can participate? What about shared histories, cultures, and political challenges? There are 150,000 at least Australians who are Malaysian or have Malaysian parents. Now, in Australia, as in Malaysia, this group, this sort of shifting diasporic group, has a massive thirst for new studies of history, society, and politics. They love the speakers that we bring. We've got to always think about how to bring in speakers. They want to hear them. And frankly, if you can't do certain things in Malaysia, we can do them here. And we do. And just in my town in Canberra, there are historians, there are language experts, there are students of politics. There are also actually first-rate rappers, poets, artists, and tennis players, all Malaysian Australian. So MasterChef isn't actually all we've got. We do have people who are building a mutually inclusive and connected cultural formation, right, that crosses the two borders. And we can build on that. 2 more themes. I think Thomas is about to remind me to stop pretty soon. I see his face. So I'm just going to tell you 2 more themes and then I'm going to wind up. Public health. Now, do you want to lift the emergency by 2023? Do we want to travel by 2023? Let's work on it. Public health is very much at the heart of these 2 issues. Certainly is at the heart of the story around these 2 issues. So let's work on it. And also human movement and humanitarian responses. Now, we have an atrocious situation in Myanmar, where humanitarian and development civil society organisations are working overseas are going to have to think about how to support counterparts on the ground, how to manage more potential human movement into other South and Southeast Asian nations. Now, if Malaysia wanted to play a role as a human security hub, and I must say I listened into the webinar the other day where we had a MIMA speaker from the Maritime Institute suggest exactly that. So if Malaysia wanted to play that kind of role, then it would certainly benefit a lot of us involved in Australia's international development program. I'm not here to spruik for my employer, but I did want to say that I think there is a need to reconceptualize how we actually interact with a region that is in some part, I guess, closing down. I mean, Scott Morrison said it was polarizing. So let's think about how to actually work with that. Now, to finish off, I should say that I didn't just do a thought bubble here. I did actually raise this idea with a couple of key university leaders in Australia and Malaysia, and there is strong initial interest in setting up this kind of consortium. Now, there are precedents. There's an Australia-Indonesia Council, there's a New Generation India Network, and there is also infrastructure. Several Australian universities have campuses in Malaysia that can no longer function to simply ship in students. You know, we have loved the students, but it's, you know, the politics of that are changing now. The reality of that is changing now. But that infrastructure sitting in Malaysia does not have to lie idle. It can underpin research and policy initiatives that can host longer term student and staff exchanges. And I mean long enough to justify the quarantine, the expense of travel, etc. It can underpin joint research projects, joint publishing that is quality assured, because there is an issue of concern about predatory journals in Malaysia. We can run some grants, we can run some advocacy, we can have some government relations capacity. Now, this is the kind of thing I'd like to see both governments support. If we're talking about how to step up, how to use the CSP, you know, as research institutes or think tanks or CSOs, and I'd like to see a solid group of institutions get behind and contribute to it, as well as build it, so that everyone involved has a genuine interest in making it work. So you can count me in as willing to help make it happen, and I'd like to see the CSP start to work pretty quickly as the foundation of this sort of thing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Amrita. That was a pretty packed 11 minutes, I think, with quite a lot to chew about, and quite a and quite a few questions that might come up. Folks, for those of you who are attending this, if you do have any questions, let me remind you that you can post them through the Q&A, and if you have really burning interventions, we do accept those of you who want to raise their hand to intervene through audio as well, but save that for the really burning interventions. I'm going to hold off on my questions for Amrita, although I might have a few, and move on to our next speaker, Ben Bland. So Ben is the director of the Southeast Asia program at the Lowy Institute, based out of Sydney. His most recent publication is a very interesting book, A Man of Contradictions, Joko Widodo and the Struggle to Remake Indonesia. Ben is currently pursuing research projects on internet governance and the future of economic development models in Southeast Asia. But Ben is also an extremely astute observer of Southeast Asia, and I for one have really enjoyed some of his interventions when he has showed up at some of the ISIS Malaysia forums back when we used to have in-person forums. Ben will be keeping his remarks on the strategic aspect of this relationship, prospects for strategic cooperation, perhaps from Australia's perspectives. Ben, let me turn it over to you.
Thanks, Thomas, for the kind introduction, and thanks to Andrew and Amrita and Herizal for sharing their thoughts. Looking forward to the discussion. So yeah, I've been living in Southeast Asia, or working on Southeast Asia for South Asian politics for most of the last 20 years. And I think it is fair to say that Australia's relationships with a number of key partners in Southeast Asia, including Malaysia, probably are as good as they have ever been, or at least in a long time. True of Australia-Malaysia relations, probably also true of Australia-Indonesia relations, Australia-Vietnam as well. So I think that's great to see. But as an analyst, when I hear people talk about strategic partnerships or comprehensive strategic partnerships or comprehensive partnerships, there's a bit of an alphabet soup out there. I always wonder, what do they mean in practice? There's always a lot of highfalutin language and ambition in the text, but what does it mean in practice, and how can we deliver on that? So I'm just going to do a bit of a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, to try and make some sense really of the strategic aspects of the bilateral relationship and what that tells us about the potential for cooperation on a kind of multilateral basis, which is what I've been asked to talk about. So very briefly, the strengths. We have obviously two middle powers, I'd say, that value global trade and want a global system that protects the interests of smaller nations. Both countries have shared sea lines of communication through the Indian and Pacific Oceans, similar parliamentary systems and common law legacy, as has already been mentioned, deep and broad people-to-people engagement and educational links, and also quite interesting and diverse institutional linkages across economic and security areas. So from the five-power defense arrangements and the Butterworth Air Base to the various ASEAN fora, CPTPP, the Cairns Group that Andrew mentioned, looking at trading agricultural goods. So those are all some of the key strengths. The weaknesses, I would say, very different attitudes towards great power alliances. Obviously, as Andrew alluded to, Malaysia is strictly non-aligned. Australia is a key alliance partner of the US. We see that now with Afghanistan, Australia pulling out. At the same time, as President Biden said he would do the same. Also, while both nations are interested in global trade, there are differences in trade policy. Malaysia, of course, yet to ratify CPTPP amid concerns over the impact on the Bumi-Putra policies, on the GLCs, the government-linked companies, and also quite a wide range of what I'd call cultural, political differences and or historical baggage. So some of those questions stemming from the colonial era, differences on approach to Palestine and other questions like that. And a bunch of, I guess, kind of political rows over the years, which thankfully seem mostly behind us, but I guess the baggage is still there. So that's the strengths and weaknesses. I'll go to the opportunities, which means unfortunately I end on the threats, but hopefully that prompts some good debate later on. I was thinking about changing it from SWOT analysis to SWOTO, but it doesn't work as well. So opportunities, I'm going to try and be quite practical here. So the first one I would say would be broadly define the COVID recovery, although I guess COVID mitigation is perhaps a better way to put it, given what's going on in Malaysia, and that there are so many risks ahead still for Australia too. So what are the practical areas where Australia and Malaysia could work together multilaterally? I think we have to look at things like vaccines, vaccine distribution, vaccine equity. I think people were thinking this was by and large going to be a problem for poorer countries, but we see in Australia with the recent difficulties getting hold of Pfizer, actually very rich countries that thought they were ahead of the game, like Australia, have their own problems too. So I think this really has to be an area where we genuinely need to see that multilateral cooperation. There's been a lot of talk about it so far, hasn't materialized yet. We know that a Malaysian delegate will be joining the World Health Organization Executive Board from the middle of this year. So that's one area, vaccines, travel arrangements as well. A lot of talk about travel corridors. I think perhaps it's going to be more interesting looking at what happens with testing certification, vaccine passports later on. And obviously it's two big countries with a lot of travel connecting them and the rest of the world, a lot of tourism. There is a vested interest for both countries to be a bigger part of the global conversation, because we need global standards. At the end of the day, we can't have Hong Kong, Singapore corridors, Australia, New Zealand corridors. That won't get us anywhere. So it's about using Australia and Malaysia's roles in these other multilateral groups to try and get some common standards. The same with trade and transport facilitation more broadly. Then there's a whole other basket of issues I'd call broadly economic governance. And this relates, I think, to both Australia and Malaysia's interests as, small but important members of the global trading system wanting a fair go at part of that system. So there I'd say things like making sure that the World Trade Organization is functioning better as the preeminent referee and also driver of trade liberalizations. We know about the problems in constituting the appellate body that came out of the legacy of the Trump administration. Australia has obviously been a bit more active there as a member of the Ottawa Group in pushing for WTO reform, but Malaysia has obviously brought quite a number of high-profile WTO cases itself, and there should be a vested interest in more cooperation there on trying to make the WTO work better and more fairly. Another kind of couple of issues on economic governance would be infrastructure coordination across Southeast Asia. I mean, as part of the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific, this was something that's mentioned. Australia has been funding a number of initiatives designed to better coordinate infrastructure across the region, and that's something that Malaysia, as one of the much more developed countries within ASEAN, I think can play a role in as well. Instead of a hodgepodge of different Belt and Road, Japanese and other projects, how can we bring these things together to ensure they work better for a much bigger range of people, both within Southeast Asia and beyond? And one of the other areas I think we could think about more cooperation on is the role and protections for migrant workers within Southeast Asia and the broader Indo-Pacific as well, where there are a lot of issues in Australia, a lot of issues in Malaysia, and room for much more coordination. The other two baskets of issues, briefly, one, I would say regional security, broadly defined. So Myanmar being, I think, a key question there, where Australia has a lot at stake, Malaysia has a lot at stake, so does the region. I don't think there's been anywhere near enough talking face to face yet on these questions. So I think it'd be great to see some senior officials from Australia going to Malaysia, going around the region, having those private, difficult talks about what we can do about the Myanmar question politically, but also, as Amrita alluded to, on the question of humanitarian issues, which are going to be much more pertinent. And obviously Malaysia is much more on the front line, but those are challenges that Australia needs to face too, and they have to be tackled multilaterally, but it needs trusted partners like Australia and Malaysia to have those private sideline conversations as well to try and get some movement. And the last one I'd say would be people-to-people links. We can't just rely on the governments. These things will never move ahead if it's just purely government to government. Easy to have grandiose statements in a comprehensive strategic partnership, and it needs the people, educational institutions, think tanks, companies to really make this happen as well. So then what are the challenges or threats? I think in the short term, as Amrita alluded to, political instability in Malaysia is a big challenge. How can you move ahead without more clarity about what's going to happen in domestic politics in Malaysia after what's been quite an unstable period in the last few years? I'd say another short-term challenge is obviously the pandemic, but also Australia's response. Australia's kind of putting up its borders to the world has been pretty effective in reducing the case numbers, but there's got to be a big concern now about how is Australia going to reintegrate with the world? How is that going to happen? Most of the students from Malaysia and elsewhere, they've not been allowed to come back to Australia. That puts attention on relationships between both countries, but also I think Australia's role in the region. Zoom calls for me, video conferences, won't cut it. Australian senior leaders need to get back out into the rest of the world, as our friends in China have done. Wang Yi and his comrades have had 21 face-to-face meetings with their Southeast Asian counterparts since August alone. So that's one area that Australia, I think, needs to work on. And just lastly, in the medium term, there are some slightly bigger challenges. I'd say first is differences in political systems or political values. Again, Amrita alluded to that. In the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership, there was talk about working together to tackle fake news and disinformation. But if you look at some of the work that ISIS in Malaysia has done on how, that's been used by the government to really go after civil society activists and to shut down free speech. I think most people in Australia would have a very different view of how, disinformation and misinformation should be tackled. But again, this is an issue where we can't leave it to our governments. In Australia, there are concerns about government overreach on free speech and control of the internet too. So this has to be an area where we talk to each other beyond the governments. And just lastly, I think quite a big challenge ahead is differences in geopolitical outlook. So this difference between Australia being a US alliance partner and Malaysia being non-aligned, it's not technical. Why? Because the consensus thinking now in Canberra is that the Australian relationship with China, which is probably as bad almost as it's ever been, is in a one-way downward spiral. There is no one in Canberra who thinks there's any way back from this anytime soon. Meanwhile, Malaysia is playing it much more carefully. It's in a very different position. While not everyone was happy with Hishammuddin's big brother comments, I think it does reflect a lot of deference that Malaysia shows to China and a much more balanced approach. And I think that difference in outlook is only going to become more strained as Australia's relationship with China becomes more strained and as the US kind of China competition plays out in the next few years. So I think that's going to be quite challenging. At the same time, hopefully it does represent an opportunity for more dialogue between Australia and Malaysia about how we can tackle this pretty difficult outlook for great power relations. So hopefully there are some concerning threats there. Hopefully there's some good points of discussion too. Looking forward to the chat later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ben. That was a pretty comprehensive way of doing it, and there's quite a lot to chew on as well. I think ending on the sort of challenges or the threats is a pretty interesting approach. Sometimes we tend to sort of dwell on that towards the end, but that's all right because it does give us a lot to sort of think about. One of the challenges that I found in trying to think about this bilateral relationship is that people tend to veer on both extreme edges. It's either positive all the way or it's doom and gloom. But to try and get that middle ground is hopefully a conversation that we can have later on in this session. Let's move on to our third speaker, Dr. Adam Leong. Adam is an associate professor in strategic studies and a deputy research director at the Center for Defense and International Security at the National Defense University of Malaysia. He lectures and supervises dissertations at the Malaysian Armed Forces Staff College and the Malaysian Armed Forces Defence College, as well as the National Resilience College. Adam will be speaking to us for about 10 minutes on the prospects, the opportunities, the challenges of strategic cooperation from a very Malaysian perspective. Adam, I'm turning it over to you.
All right, thank you very much, Thomas. Thank you very much, Herizal, and of course, His Excellency Andrew, and my co-speakers, Dr. Amrita and Bang. Being the third speaker, I don't think I have much to add on to. We have the first two speakers has spoken a lot of the key issues pertaining Australia and Malaysia's strategic partnership. So I will focus on the defense aspects of Australia and Malaysia partnership. I will start with a brief background of Australia and Malaysia's long defense partnership, and then I will explain the geostrategic logic behind Australia and Malaysia's close defense partnership, and more importantly, as Thomas said, what is the potential benefits for Malaysia with this new CSP that we have just, both parties have just agreed on. Australia's defense cooperation with Malaysia has a long history. Australian forces have fought against Japanese forces in Malaya during Second World War, conducted counterinsurgency operations during the Malayan Emergency 1948 to 1960, and defended Malaysia during the Indonesia-Malaysia confrontation. I think this was, as earlier pointed out by His Excellency Andrew. Australian military units continue its physical presence in Malaysia with the start of the Five Powers Defence Arrangements, FPDA, since 1970. Throughout the decades, you can see close defence partnership with Australia. We have Royal Australian Air Force, RAAF combat aircraft based in Butterworth. You have CAC, Cerberus, Gossard, Morash Trace, and more recently, AP-3C Orion maritime patrol aircraft. Even during the 1960s, 1970s, before the Royal Malaysian Air Force has developed its capabilities, the RAAF provided air defense capabilities for Malaysia. Uniquely, Australia also has an infantry unit based in Butterworth Air Base, known as the Rifle Company Butterworth. Its tasks are to jointly secure the air base and conduct joint training exercises with the Malaysian Armed Forces. The Rifle Company Butterworth just celebrated its 50th anniversary in Malaysia last year. And throughout the 5 decades, a total of 25,000 Australian troops have been rotated in and out of Malaysia. A staggering figure by all accounts. So as Excellency Andrew has said earlier on, this is certain aspects of our close defense relationship between both countries that has not been widely publicized. A lot of people do not know about this, how strong we are in terms of defense partnership. Under the FPDA platform, we have an integrated air defense system, IADS, again based in Butterworth, the headquarters, to provide air defense coverage for Peninsular Malaysia and Singapore, and is commanded by an Australian Air Vice Marshal. So the Royal Australian Air Force also conducts Operation Gateway since 1981 from Butterworth Air Base, maritime surveillance patrols during the Cold War against Soviet presence, and of course more recently in the wider Indo-Pacific region to gather surveillance data regarding security threats. Malaysia serves as an important forward-basing location supporting Australia's forward defense policy. Australia is a large continental island with a small population of about 25 million people today. It will be very difficult for Australia with its small military defense cells for the Australian Defence Force to defend its large territory, and rather than having enemy approach close to Australia's shores, forward defense will enable Australia to mitigate security risks in Southeast Asia before it reaches Australia. And this includes more contemporary non-traditional security issues like terrorism, perhaps even illegal human trafficking, and human movement. So Malaysia is a very important geostrategic location for Australia to mitigate security risks. Australia also has strong engagement with the Southeast Asia region, as Bang just now has mentioned. It's an active dialogue of ASEAN Defence Ministers Plus meetings, ADMM Plus. ASEAN as a bloc is the second largest trading partner with Australia. So hence, geostrategically, Australia sees this region, Southeast Asia, an important partner in Malaysia, of course, to protect and secure its Australia's own national interests, which of course also has some similar shared national interests with Malaysia, as mentioned earlier on by Bang just now. But the more important question for us today is, what are the strategic benefits of the CSP for Malaysia? The so what question from Malaysia's perspective. So in view of the elevation of the bilateral Malaysia, Australia-Malaysia CSP, I think it will certainly benefit Malaysia in a few ways when I talk about from the strategic and defense perspectives. For a start, the presence of Australian troops and air power assets in Malaysia serves as an important deterrent for would-be aggressors to Malaysia. The joint training and cross-posting of military officers in both countries' defense forces provide important experience and training for both militaries. As Thomas mentioned earlier on, I also teach at the Malaysian Armed Forces Staff College and involved in the Malaysian Defence College. These colleges have Australian officers, senior officers, posted there as directing staff. And vice versa, Malaysia also have our senior officers posted in Australian Defence Forces. So there's a strong joint collaboration or cooperation between both countries' defence forces. Another aspect I would like to highlight an example how this close defence cooperation has garnered strategic utility for Malaysia. During last year, while the world was grappling with the coronavirus pandemic, China has continued its maritime operations in the South China Sea. On 17 April 2020, a Chinese government survey ship, the Haiyan DZ-8, with 10 Coast Guard and maritime militia vessels, scheduled a Petronas contracted exploration ship, the West Capella, about 324 kilometers from the Malaysian coastline. This prompted the US to send a small flotilla to the scene to check what is going on. And shortly later, the Royal Australian Navy deployed its frigate, HMAS Parramatta, to the sea. So after spending a few days, everyone sort of dispersed and returned to where they were. But indirectly, I see the presence of Australia's HMAS Parramatta quick reaction to the sea proved the importance of Malaysia's long strategic and defense cooperation with Australia. So it sort of gave us that extra bit of indirect defense linkage to Australia that when there are problems, when we have shared interests, especially in the South China Sea, Australia, and of course, the US also came to our assistance to see what's happening, and of course, to check on what the Chinese were doing at the point of time. There are also some other potential areas where the CSP may benefit Malaysia in the future. Firstly, in intelligence sharing. Malaysia may benefit with better intelligence sharing with Australia in terms of countering, for example, countering terrorism issues, and of course, for maritime security. Bear in mind that Australia is a member of the Five Eyes intelligence grouping and has substantial capabilities in intelligence gathering. So certain important and highly sensitive intelligence may be shared with Malaysia to better protect both shared security interests in the region. Another key area today is in cyber defense capability development. Under Australia's 2020 strategic update published last year, based on its 2016 defense white paper, Australia has indicated it needs to upgrade its information and cyber capabilities, planning to spend about 15 billion Australian dollars in the next decade to upgrade its cyber capabilities. So this is one area I see how Malaysia defense and Australia defense can jointly develop capabilities, conduct joint training, and even sharing of technology in the cyber domain between these two countries in a possible future strategic collaboration under the CSP. Malaysia can also leverage on Australia's current capability development in long-range strike capabilities, such as long-range anti-ship missiles, modern frigates, and new submarines. Closer defense cooperation via the CSP, I believe will enable Malaysia to gain some shared strategic deterrent capabilities with Australia. Australia also has a naval presence in the South China Sea for quite some time to ensure the international rules-based order is respected. Malaysia shares similar vision. Australia's support of the rules-based order will enhance Malaysia's own capacity and interest in safeguarding Malaysia's territorial waters, exclusive economic zone (EEZ), and continental shelves, subscribing to UNCLOS rulings, and with Australia as a strategic partner to jointly monitor the South China Sea to prevent and deter UNCLOS-like behavior. With the CSP, both Malaysia and Australia can continue to develop joint military capabilities to conduct humanitarian relief operations under the ASEAN Plus HADR platform, and of course within the FPDA platform. This joint humanitarian training exercises operations will develop capabilities for both Australia and Malaysia to conduct rapid HADR operations in the region when there's an emergency. So this is some areas where our defense forces can collaborate. So these are just some potential areas that see how Australia and Malaysia can benefit from the defense perspective with the new CSP. I would like to end my short talk today by calling this uniquely close strategic partnership that has a long shared strategic history, shared strategic and security interests, and shared values, now elevated to the highest level in typical Australian fashion as mates all the way. So with that, thank you very much. I'll pass back to you, Thomas.
Thank you so much, Ben. And I apologize if you can start hearing drilling from on top of my house. So let me make this as quick and as painless as possible. I'm going to abuse my privilege as moderator to ask the first question. We do have some questions in the Q&A chat, and I hope those of you who have more questions will start throwing them in now. If you have burning interventions or questions or comments, disagreements with what the speakers have said, please feel free to raise your hand function. Use the raise your hand function. Okay. I guess I'm going to kick it off by proposing a general question to all three speakers, and then a second question to both Adam and Ben. The general question really is this: so we've heard Mr. Herizal, we've heard High Commissioner Andrew, and in fact all of us, all the speakers here. There is a lot of substance to this relationship. There's a lot of history to this relationship, but I wonder if do policymakers on both sides here in Canberra and in Putrajaya, do we take a lot of this relationship for granted? We assume we know because it's an old relationship, it's a long relationship, it's a pretty close relationship in certain sectors. Is there a risk here that policymakers on both sides, that sort of even thinkers and academics and those of us in the think tank world, are assuming that we know each other without realizing the sort of domestic changes in thinking and policy that is taking place? And an example that I can throw out here is the rather, it's about how surprised some Malaysians are at how this narrative of what China represents in Canberra has sort of changed over the last 2 years. How it's, the sort of conversations that are taking place about influence operations and other bilateral relations, comments about the pandemic and so on. There's a lot of confusion about what this means, and most folks tend to just attribute it to China, to Canberra being a part of the anti-China bloc, if that's an actual term for here. So that's a general question. A more specific question to Adam and to Ben really is, Adam, you spoke quite a lot about the defense side, and I think one of the questions that have come in here has been on from Dr. Chin, I think, has been on the 5-power defense agreement. So has the FPDA in all this time, has it sort of outlived its relevancy? Is it still relevant, and if so, what is the relevance in this part of in this bilateral relationship? I'm going to pause there and let you guys answer. Amrita, you can go first.
Thanks, Thomas. I was just going to suggest, why don't you tell us, which one of us should unmute? But thanks. Okay, so look, there is a lot of substance and history in the relationship, exactly as you said, Thomas. But do policymakers take it for granted? Look, I think yes. I think they have. Certainly, I think there is a growing awareness that they have, so I don't know that it's necessarily going to be continued, right? And I think the CSP is a sign of that. But I can remember, when I was a PhD student, going to the Australian High Commission in KL and kind of making friends, and really then just never going back for another 15 years because nothing was happening. There was nothing to do in contact with the Australian High Commission in KL. So then suddenly there was, because Malaysia suddenly changed in 2018. And even there, this is not an assignation of blame at any particular group of people in Australia, but there was a lot of surprise that such a thing could have happened, that a government could have fallen in Malaysia. And it was only very late in the day, like maybe a day or two before it actually happened, that people were starting to consider maybe this could happen. But, it could, the signs were there for, they were building up gradually for about 8 years. I don't want to be teleological and say we could always see them coming, because that's not the case either. There was a lot of possibility, right? But at the same time, it wasn't as sudden as some people made out. There were signs, and there certainly were signs, much earlier in the year, in the previous year, where you could start to say, oh my goodness, I think that these guys might actually pull it off and actually beat the system that is designed not to allow oppositions to win. Now, the fact that that was just so complicated for Australians to understand, I think is a sign of just a certain comfort, like you ease into a relationship with a nation that you've always known, that's always had the same government that you've always known, that's never going to change, that you've always known, the students keep coming, that you've always known. That has been, I think, one of the big problems actually, is we're all just too close for comfort. It's all just been too cozy. And then when it suddenly was a bit less cozy, it's been quite a difficult job actually trying to explain and guide, Australian reactions. It's really not been easy at all. So it's time to shift that, I think.
Thank you. Ben?
Thanks, Thomas. Thanks, Amrita. Yeah, I guess I'd broadly agree with Amrita. I think there has been a sort of taking for granted of the relationship. Obviously, things like the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership hopefully will cause a bit of a refocus. But one concern I have in this respect is that we hear a lot of talk from Australia's political leaders about broad spectrum competition with China, about these great battles between democracy and authoritarianism. But that really won't get you very far in Southeast Asia, where you really have a handful of electoral democracies. You could argue that in many cases, probably Malaysia included, they're not really liberal democracies, but a different flavor of democracy. And that language isn't going to get you very far. But more than that, I think the more that Australian policymakers and politicians become sort of obsessed with talking about China and competition with China, in a way it distracts from the hard work of engaging with the 10 very different, or 11 if you include Timor-Leste, very different countries of Southeast Asia, which all have different needs, different government systems, different desires for the relationship with Australia too. And that is hard, complicated work, which obviously people like Andrew spend a lot of time doing on the ground. But I worry at a political level that understanding isn't there, and it's much easier to talk big about, pushing back against China with the US, much harder to do the difficult work. So I think that's one question. On FPDA, I don't think it's outlived its relevance. I mean, in a way, it's an amazing accident of history, right? Individually, we're all accidents of our history, and so are our nations too. And there's no way today, if Scott Morrison called up his counterpart, PM Meaden, and said, do you mind if we sign an agreement so we can put Australian maritime surveillance or spy planes in your territory to monitor what China's up to in the South China Sea? That would not be happening. So it actually suits Australia, it suits Malaysia that this is there, and it's a historical legacy which allows quite a high degree of cooperation, which I think Malaysia, while it does want to balance its relationships, would never allow this sort of thing with China. We have to be clear. So I think it's interesting, it's still useful, but is it going to be a kind of defense alliance where both countries protect each other if they're threatened by an outside partner? I don't really think that's the point of it if you read the wording. And I don't think it's really going to kind of resolve the balance of our questions more generally in Southeast Asia or the Asia Pacific. I think that's a much bigger question. So I'd say in the end, it's something that is indispensable, but obviously inadequate on its own. So important that it's still there, but probably new energies should be focused on other things. That would be my view.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think Adam, please.
Okay, Thomas, thank you. My answer will probably answer both questions about whether policymakers take it for granted and the FPDA perspective. FPDA is one example of how the policymakers sort of take it for granted in the sense that FPDA is there. We know the long history and Australia's involvement in Malaysia, the presence of air power, maritime patrol, carrying intelligence operations today in the South China Sea, Indian Ocean. Australian troops are based there. You have the IADS commanded by an Australian Air Vice Chief Marshal, a very senior high-ranking Royal Australian Air Force officer. So you can see how strong impregnated Australian Defence Forces into Malaysia's interests. But nobody talks about that. It's not out in the open, but it's there. And that is a strong indication how our defense relationship has been taken for granted. At the same time, it is very useful for Malaysia. For Australia, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, as a very important geostrategic location, forward-facing to protect its wider Indo-Pacific interests. For Malaysia, we benefited with the kind of joint training that we have, of course, sharing of certain information from the maritime patrol surveillance aircraft that is flying out now today. And that will continue on. Of course, with the presence of military units in Malaysia, you do see that has some sort of limited, I would say quite limited sense of deterrence. And that makes this FPDA very valuable for Malaysia's context. And bear in mind, FPDA is the only indirect, at the same time, direct semi-defense pact. Although it's an arrangement, it's a dialogue, but it's a very, but it's the only indirect, direct defense pact that we have, Malaysia has with a foreign power, and that is Australia. And Australia is reading our Indo-Pacific region, and we share similar visions. We share a lot of similar things like similar governance system, similar legal system, and diaspora in Australia, and that makes this special relation very important. Now, a very important aspect is that FPDA also includes United Kingdom and Singapore. Of course, no one is talking about Singapore. I think Singapore has also benefited quite significantly from the FPDA platform through joint training exercise, exchange of personnel between the two different armed forces of both countries. And to talk about United Kingdom has its first aircraft carrier after quite a long period of time, which when they scrapped the last one, is operational ready. And they're planning to conduct a voyage from United Kingdom through the Suez Canal, Indian Ocean, through South China Sea, Straits of Malacca, South China Sea to Japan, if I remember correctly, but very uniquely bypassing the Taiwan Straits. So there are some political reasons. But the UK has returned back with its expeditionary power. So FPDA without the UK at one point in time did not have that expeditionary edge where a power could come and assist, say, Malaysia. If there's problem, if FPDA is activated, and who can come to our assistance in realistic terms. Now with the United Kingdom rebuilding back its expeditionary power, at least FPDA would have that added advantage to it. So I think FPDA is still very important today. In today's context, it has always been has that important platform for both Malaysia and Australia, and I believe it will continue so. Yeah.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, there's a host of questions left. Isa, you wanna take some of them away?
Yeah, sure. I'll take up with the first one. So these two sets of questions, we'll pass it to Amrita and Ben. The first one would be, given Malaysia and Australia's history, especially regarding the death penalty, do you think that the history and the sort of policies going towards that, could that impede or fully impair the potential bilateral cooperations in the future? And second, Malaysian students have been one of the large chunk of students international students coming in as part of Australia's own education industry. But given the COVID situation right now, and also the Australian government's own moves towards the cuts and changes to the education system and universities, what do you think what's the future in that? And do you think it can recover to what it used to be? And yeah, Amrita can start first.
I guess it must be alphabetical order. So, okay, that's fine. Listen, on the death penalty.
Hello.
Oh, Andrew, did you want to say something? No? Okay. Look, on the death penalty, it's been a difference for a long time. I mean, I can't think of a time when a majority of Australians have wanted there to be a death penalty, or even a large minority. I mean, I think it's just one of these things that, you know, it's just a difference in views about how you approach, you know, criminality. And, you know, for that matter, there's lots of Malaysians that don't really want a death penalty either, but, you know, there we are, you know, we sort of have it. And it hasn't changed anything for all this time. There are from time to time discussions about it, as there should be. I'm not going to pretend I support there being a death penalty. There should not be a death penalty, and that's that. And so I'm happy to say that, and I think many Australians are happy to say that. And yet, you know, life goes on and relationships continue to be built, etc. So yeah, it should come up frankly and done freely, I suppose. Now, on the Malaysian students, look, this is a tough one. I mean, you know, frankly, there are well-paid lobbyists for the higher education industry that can make the argument for lots more international students if they want to. I'm not one of them. I don't have that sort of paycheck, and it isn't really my business. I have in my own talk, I guess, suggested a way to transform the way we do business as higher education institutions that have an interest in both Australia and Malaysia. There is infrastructure in Malaysia that I've talked about, all those campuses. You know, in a way, their role has been to kind of prepare students who are ultimately going to come here on international student visas, or, you know, they might get the distance education and they might stay in Malaysia. But really, it's been a kind of a supply chain infrastructure, right? And that can shift. I mean, I think there is going to be a shift, whether I spruik for the university sector or not, which I'm not going to. So let's just get on with kind of actualizing the shift, which is, you know, towards, I think, more long-standing cooperation, so that it's no longer kind of a one-way trade. We call it an export trade. It's also an import of human beings. We don't need to operate it like that any longer, especially since we can't. So let's, you know, I guess, focus on some of those higher value and higher level relationships around research and I guess education at a higher level as well, postgraduate education, participation in research programs around some of the themes that we mentioned, you know, the defense colleges and so on. You know, they have relationships already, and actually so do many universities, but they're ad hoc. So I guess bringing them together and forming, as Andrew mentioned, a coalition now around some of the issues that we have as common challenges, and sort of approaching them from a research and policy perspective, I think is the way to proceed.
Just very briefly, yeah, obviously I oppose the death penalty as well. I guess there are circumstances if Australians are facing it when it can damage bilateral relations. I saw that when I was in Indonesia, and there was very high profile executions of 2 Australians, which caused a lot of problems and took many years to recover. But broadly, Australia has deep relationships with many other countries with the death penalty, the US, Japan and Singapore, to name a few. And just on education, obviously, the challenge now is clearly the borders. Australian universities have taken a lot of money from Malaysians and other students all around the world who are not allowed to come in to Australia. There is no sign of any kind of program to allow them in through quarantine system anytime soon. So maybe that will, as Amrita was saying, encourage a broader thinking about do Australian universities really want to kind of pack them in, as it were, as has been their model in the last few years, or do something deeper and longer lasting, which is probably more beneficial in the end for the bilateral relationship.
Fantastic. We've got quite a few questions coming in, but we might not have much time in the webinar left, but that's all right. I'm going to pose a couple of questions, and this is open to all of the panelists. And depending on the answers, we might sort of conclude on that, but we will see. So the first question really, again, this is open to all, is, you know, we've got a comment by Alif Hidayat, and Alif speaks about how one of the things that was not really mentioned but in this webinar was the challenges of climate change and the impact of climate change to both our countries. And he believes it's an opportunity where Malaysia and Australia can collaborate on. Australia has, it's very well known challenges with extreme weather, from drought to fires to floods, with very tragic human consequences. And Malaysia has also been seeing its own extreme weather, and it's very susceptible to sea levels of change. If the US and China can sort of still have these conversations of collaborating on climate change, even amidst all these, increasingly fractious, geopolitical relationships, how can Malaysia and Australia try to fit in these conversations on climate change? How can, is there a chance for both countries to sort of advance SDGs, for example? That's the first question. The second one is it's probably a good way to sort of conclude, and it's slightly chewy. So this is by Stephen Wong, and Stephen, Stephen says, Malaysia has a CSP with China. Before Australia, the only country that Malaysia had a comprehensive strategic partnership or an arrangement with is China. And China is much more economically and socially integrated into Malaysia than Australia. Maybe some of you might disagree with that, but how will competing interests of the two be balanced? Because Singapore CSP with Australia seems to have gone much deeper. And how much is the difference in trust rather than values? Trust in Canberra and in Putrajaya toward each other, how much does that play in what can be achieved? So that's a pretty sort of chewy thing to sort of address, but it might be a good way to sort of end this. Adam, can we start with you this time, and then we will work our way backwards?
Okay, thank you, Thomas. I'll probably try to answer the question number 2. Malaysia has CSP with China, and how does Malaysia balance the relationship between China and Australia? I think what Malaysia has always been doing, and quite consistently, is that we project our foreign policy as neutral and non-aligned status, in a sense that we work with any powerful countries with maybe equal distance. So in this aspect, you can see how this neutrality and non-alignment is playing out. We are very good relationship with China. We are very strong economic bilateral ties, as you mentioned. At the same time, as we are discussing it, we also have a long shared strong relationship with Australia. And of course, the main thing now, Australia and China has some sort of competition, has some sort of debate going on among themselves regarding certain issues. So how does Malaysia fit in? So I think Malaysia can continue to play the leader role, that we can be friends with all. And at the same time, Malaysia can jump in strongly, take this opportunity, make ourselves known as a middle power, be the connector between these different rivals going on. We can become as a mediator. We can engage with China. We have strong relationship with China. We have strong relationship with Australia. Why not we use this strength to bring these two powers in some sort of a forum or platform where we can resolve certain difficult questions and issues, in a sense that we have been doing that with many countries. Before North Korea cuts its diplomatic ties with us, we have been doing that with North Korea, trying to get North Korea engaged with ASEAN and indirectly with the other greater powers. And bear in mind, Malaysia is a member of ASEAN. You have ASEAN Plus, Trade Plus 6, you have ADMM Plus, and all these platforms, and also ASEAN Regional Forum, where we can play a very strong leader power role in trying to mediate the different power rivalries between these powers over there. So I believe that Malaysia has that benefit. We have the long-standing record of being neutral and non-aligning, and we can play that mediator role between these rivaling powers.
Thanks, Adam.
Thank you, Thomas.
Ben?
Well, just on climate change, I think by and large, these are domestic and multilateral global issues. They're not really bilateral issues. Of course, the US and China is a little different because of the size of their economies and their power. But broadly, climate change has to start at home. That's obviously a big problem for the Australian government right now. And it has to be global. We have to have global accords on reduction of emissions and potentially carbon taxes and everything else. So I think it's not really best served bilaterally, but of course, there are discussions that can happen. But I think, first of all, the Australian government would have to take a much more proactive leadership role in climate change, which I think is something many Australians are waiting for if you look at the recent Lowy surveys. And on the second point, I mean, there's often this kind of, I guess, false narrative of Southeast Asian countries saying we don't want to have to choose between China and America or the West and China. But I think no one's really asking anyone to choose a side, but people are being asked to take many hard choices, right? The US and its allies are. China increasingly will be more demanding. China is on a charm offensive, but China is squeezing Southeast Asia at the same time. So I just think in the years ahead, there are going to be many hard choices about what technology countries use, the decisions they make about what trading agreements they're in and how they implement them. China is okay with Malaysia having Australian P8s and P3s for now. Will that be the case in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? Not necessarily. So there are a lot more hard choices ahead, and I think these questions of trust it will make it harder. There is a more trusting relationship with Singapore, although that's partly easier because of the political stability and the lower degree of kind of competitive democracy in Singapore. So the lack of trust it makes it harder, but it's also just a reflection of the geopolitical reality that Australia was and will remain an alliance partner of the US. Malaysia will remain non-aligned, and I think it will get tougher and tougher in the years ahead. But there won't be one big decision. It's going to be many hard ones with costs and benefits to be weighed up.
Thanks a lot, Ben. That was a really good intervention. Amrita, I'm going to turn it over to you to sort of bring this home, and in particular, I wonder, you have addressed this issue of trust before, and I wonder if you could sort of tease it out just a little bit more as we bring this to a close.
I can try. I mean, I guess a couple of things that I could say about this whole China issue is one, Malaysia. Yeah, I mean, it's got a certain view. It seems to differ from the view that Australia is increasingly advocating. At the same time, Malaysia has some skill, so it's managed to kind of operate in a very complicated, tricky, geographical and political spot for quite some time. As Martha loves to say, it's been 2,000 years we've been dealing with China. We know a thing or two. So I think again, my recommendation is that we these discussions by bringing both nations into a common frame. We both got to figure out how to live in an increasingly difficult and complicated region where there are lots of different interest groups going in different directions, and somehow, I guess, states and people and civil society have to figure out how to kind of navigate all of that. I also just want to say, again, I'm a historian. I've read the archival documents. 1870s, not a very easy time. A lot of hedging, a lot of balancing, and suddenly it just stopped because Britain went in. I mean, I'm not saying that there's a power waiting there to go in, but I am saying that the best skill at hedging and balancing, it just doesn't always work. And if you think about the 1870s, it's this story always of the succession dispute, rival Malay princes, competing for the spoils, always a succession dispute, and it always internationalizes. So one party to the dispute will choose to involve an international friend. Does it sound very much like the 2018 election campaign? I mean, I think so. And so I guess I just say that, that, no, periods of history don't just repeat. They don't just, follow one after another, but, there are patterns that I think that we can observe. And it's not like Malaysia can't teach us a thing or two, by the way. So I think we can, figure that out together. It is a very, very tough one indeed. Now, on climate change, I have probably something a little more constructive, than this cryptic look at the 1870s comment that I just made, which is, have you noticed that Biden's new rhetoric around infrastructure is human infrastructure. I just want to go back to what Ben said about, you know, the need to coordinate better. You can't just have all these competing bits and pieces around, you know, infrastructure, everyone trying to kind of fall over each other to fund infrastructure, when in fact, you know, it could just be better coordinated. Well, it certainly could be better coordinated with an intervention around climate resilience, and I guess, you know, the human infrastructure that people need to be able to protect their jobs, protect their livelihoods, protect their homes, in light of the rising, you know, the increasing impacts of climate change. It isn't going to get any easier. In fact, there's all these warnings that just in the last couple of days about how we've passed the point where we're going to have 1.5 degree warming. Australia could play a much more constructive role. I mean, I know that it also wants to fund infrastructure around certainly the Pacific and possibly increasingly in Southeast Asia. I hear noises anyway, but I don't really see it kind of well integrated in a discussion around climate change, because Australia has trouble having that discussion with its neighbours. Frankly, Malaysia has some trouble with climate change as well. You know, I really don't see it on the top of the list of really any international intervention that Malaysia ever makes. So, you know, if there's some way to kind of marry that up with the question of building a human infrastructure to protect jobs, so social protection, schools and hospitals, buildings, you know, airports, community centres, maternity wards, all these things could be upgraded with climate change and climate resilience at the top of the agenda. And that's you know, something that Australia could potentially do, is be an advocate for human infrastructure. It might not even have to say climate if it has trouble saying it, but maybe borrow a little bit of this Biden thing and do a little bit of it in Southeast Asia as well as in the Pacific. So
thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, we've had an excellent discussion. We're a bit over time, but that's okay. So I'm not going to summarize this, but I'm just going to say, you know, opportunities, patterns, and hard choices. I think that's one way of sort of trying to wrap this up. Maybe not as optimistic as some of you would like, but hey, that's what you get when that's what you get when you ask the guy who believes in a half full glass to sort of manage a webinar. But in any case, my deepest thanks to the three speakers for their time, for sharing their knowledge with us today. It's been an excellent discussion. And again, our thanks to the Australian High Commission, to Mr. Herizal and His Excellency Andrew for spending time to give the opening remarks today. This session is being recorded and it will probably be uploaded to our YouTube account later. So stay tuned to our social media to find out. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking our three speakers for today. Have a good day, a good afternoon, a good evening for everyone. Thank you.
thanks to all of you.
Thanks.
Bye.